there, and welcome to the A&Q series. Now, we've been at this for a little while. This is a place where we're answering common questions that surround faith and spirituality, and what we're finding is that sometimes these answers lead to more questions. So, if you have more questions at the end of this video, great. Be sure to check out some of the other topics that we've covered on our channel, but today we're asking, what is a parable? Now, you may have heard of that word. A lot of Jesus' teaching in the Gospels is in the form of storytelling. In fact, in those first three books of the New Testament, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, about 1/3 of the recorded words of Jesus are in the form of these kinds of stories that we call parables. Now, the Greek word for parable means to throw alongside. So Jesus would take this deep, rich truth about God, and then he would throw alongside of it just an ordinary story from ordinary life. So picture now, there's this deep truth next to something familiar and something concrete. And then Jesus would make connections between the two. These parables were brilliant because they bridged the gap between so many different kinds of people and cultures. They were often just full of these beautiful layers of meaning that you can consider. But I want you to know that doesn't mean that when you come across these parables that every detail must stand for something. Like every good storyteller, Jesus is sometimes adding in little details that are there to provide color and texture to this image that he's painting for your mind to consider. For the record, by the way, he wasn't the first one to teach this way. It was definitely happening with other teachers, or we might call them rabbis of that day. But I promise you, no one had heard teaching like this, ever. All throughout the Gospels, you read of people being astonished, amazed, spellbound by his teaching. See, when Jesus taught, there was such power and authority and wisdom. But all the while, he's teaching in a culturally relevant way to reach people where they are. His parables were often quirky, shocking, sometimes humorous. Some of his stories included runaway kids, lost sheep, buried treasure, parties, sloppy farmers, neighbors that wake people up in the middle of the night, manure. It was, I'm telling you, he used all sorts of things, but it wasn't to entertain people. Every parable had that deeper meaning and message that we were talking about, and it all led them to a moment where these listeners had to make a decision. Jesus' parables were often about salvation and the decision of, what are you going to do with this life that God is offering? Really, the question was coming down to, what are you going to do with Jesus? Now, you might be asking, even after all of that, what does that have to do with me? Aren't those parables just for, listeners in the first century? Well, no, I don't think so. The brilliant teaching of Jesus is as relevant and life-changing today, and I think these stories are the same. I mean, they're just as fresh as when he first taught them. Now, when you read a parable, focus on the main thing. To help you find the message, ask yourself, what is this story telling me about God? It's something about his nature or his heart towards humanity, towards me. And then ask yourself, what decision is Jesus wanting me to make based on this story that I'm reading? Now, with that in mind, you want to try one? In Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 and 32, which means this is a really short story, Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. It is the smallest of seeds, but it becomes the largest of garden plants. It grows into a tree, and birds come and make nests in its branches." That's the parable. So what is it about? Well, there's many things we could talk about, but how about this? God doesn't need you to be big and powerful and impressive. We often think that that's how we earn God's favor, by doing lots of impressive things or having status, but that's just simply not the case. Just like a humble, small mustard seed, your small daily choices can bring honor to him. Now, let me just say this. That's faith. That's you trusting him. So over time, a life that is consistent in following God, in trusting him, in taking these steps of faith that nobody else even sees, that life grows and flourishes. It's all God's doing, but that's the point, really. Imagine what happens when your life begins to trust God. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you know what we think of Jesus. So watch how these things come together. When you realize what's happening in the Gospels in a place like this, that this is God talking to you, it leads to some choices and questions that need to be answered. What does it look like to follow God? What if I made mistakes in the past? Can God forgive me? How do I know what God wants from my life? These are really important questions that we should keep talking about. But for now, let's save those for other videos. If you're not already, subscribe so you can be notified when these new videos are released. But for now, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you for another A&Q.